Next is our book review. Unfortunately, the Minister of Employment, Labor Relations, and Pension had agreed to be here, but a higher call. He had to attend to something very pressing at the presidency, and so he sends his apologies. In his place, our very Dean, Professor Kofi Abochi, will do us the book review, and then we will continue with the program. Let's welcome him.
Chairman of Council, Dr. Kofi Abochi, Vice Chancellor, the Director of Public Prosecution. I didn't realize you were there. They don't prosecute me. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, from labor in childbirth to labor law, Speaker Author is a man of labor. He seems to have a lot of experience and understanding of things that give birth to things. And today he has given birth to a book on labor law. I'm not going to do a formal review because of time, but I also have to do my best not to be a lawyer who speaks too much. So I'm going to be as short as possible by just giving you a snapshot of what the book is about. Vice Chancellor, it's important to understand the importance of labor in national life. And indeed, in many countries in Europe, one of the most important parties are usually called labor parties. The history of these explains the role the labor plays in national development. Yet, it is also a truism that labor is one of the least researched areas in Ghana's academic life. It is on that basis that the outcome of the academic enterprise of our Vice Chancellor and Dr. Coleman stands tall today on our platform. This book is a good and a handy text for practitioners. It's a source book for industry and also the courts as well as the National Labour Commission. Having glanced through the book presents us such a good source material to understand labor law at a glance. Since its passage in 2003, the Labor Act of Ghana is one of the most controversial pieces of legislation. Controversial at least in one main respect, and that has to do with the fact that it is one legislation which is heavily abused. And since we are speaking on the campus of UPSC and therefore many of us are members of UTAC, I think we'll all agree that we hardly respect that 7-day rule that says after 7 days, whether agreed or not, go back to the classroom. UTAC is notorious, of which I'm a proud member, is notorious for not respecting that, and very often our failure to respect the Labor Act produces positive results for us. Therefore, the Americans will call that perverse incentive. There's a perverse incentive not to respect what otherwise is an obligation. This book clarifies key obligations of labor as far as the rule of law is concerned in Ghana. The book achieves two key things, which in my opinion are fundamental values for the book, and that is brevity and coverage at the same time. Shakespeare said brevity is the soul of wit, and that is to mean that it is the wise person who knows how to say a lot of things in a short passage. This book contains a lot, yet it is not particularly a dense material. So for students who would want to have HUs, I think they will find it very attractive in the sense of gaining much in few words. Within the book is contained a number of topics, some of which I'll touch on very quickly. But reading the book, however, I realized that the authors did not particularly go into contested areas. And I'm saying contested areas in the sense of areas that are likely to be controversial or politically controversial. And so some of the issues were not necessarily framed in what we normally call the political economy arguments. As to, for example, why should government decide? Why should government regulate free enterprise? Why should government decide that you cannot go on strike beyond a certain period when the Constitution allows, for example, for freedom of expression. And so if I choose not to work. Why should government balance the economic interest of the country against the private expectations or private commercial expectations of people at work? Nonetheless, the book considers a number of key and important topics, such as the protection of employment. All of us employed need to understand the rules and regulations that govern our work as employees. Under what circumstances can your employment be terminated? Under what circumstances, what kinds of rights do we have as employees? What are our liabilities? What are the limitations on the employers? The issues of sexual harassment. For example, the Labor Act is the only legislation in Ghana that touches on sexual harassment. And therefore, while some may think that sexual harassment is criminal, sexual harassment is only a civil liability in Ghana. And so, and it's not only a civil liability in Ghana, but it's only protected in the context of employment. And so sexual harassment outside of employment ordinarily is not regulated. It is important to have access to a book like this to understand some of these topical issues. The book, for example, considers some of the key and important topics on industrial relations, so one of which I've just touched on the question of strikes and lockouts. There are other issues in industrial relations, such as the Tripartite Committee, relationships and arrangement in terms of labor relations with government, negotiations for wage and salary increments and improvements, among others. It is important, therefore, for all of us to have copies of this book, if for nothing at all, for the mere fact that we are all at the place of labor. We are either employees or employers. And even where we are employers, we often report to regulatory entities within the workspace. The National Labour Commission is a very powerful entity that sort of provides a judicial ambit or judicial arm for the statutory provisions contained in the Labour Act. It's therefore important to understand the role of the National Labour Commission, the role of other industrial relations bodies or entities which are not necessarily structured officially within statutes. The book also considers, as I mentioned, things like unlawful deductions from salary. I think this is an area that should be of interest to many people, whether employers can deduct things from our salary. But one thing that is of interest that you may want to also look at within the book is the fact that your employer can actually deduct things from your salary if your employer thinks that you have not worked or behaved up to a certain standard within the context of your work. And as I have the finance officer sitting here, I hope he doesn't start exercising the idea or thinking of the prospect of deducting salaries whenever I miss classes, because I'm not supposed, we are supposed to be, the book contains one of the discussions that the authors indulged in, which I found quite intriguing, is the discussion on what is called equal pay for equal work. And the authors were quick to point out the fact that the Ghanaian Constitution nor the statutes, neither the Ghanaian Constitution nor the statute sort of explains that or sort of expands on the meaning of that concept. But they very quickly borrowed from international practice to sort of explain how these concepts are applied at the international level. But if you take it on the face value, of course, the immediate explanation or the immediate understanding for that is equal pay for equal work, meaning there should be no discrimination on the basis of who is doing what when people are doing similar things with similar outcomes. But within that also maybe contain the fact that people will have to earn what they earn, and therefore you will have to work for it. On a campus or in a university environment where sometimes non-attendance at lectures is punished at various levels, the question is whether we can have salary or emolument deductions for failure to do our work. But I think the converse is also true. The fact that we should be compensated beyond what we are entitled to when we work over and above what is expected of us. All in all, this book is a very important piece in terms of how it addresses the matters without beating about the bush. The reason why I particularly commend it to students lies in the fact that it speaks directly to the point. The sentences are short, the sentences are effective, and you do not have to spend a lot of time to gain a small piece of knowledge from extensive literature. I think that the writing clearly reflects the necessity of use, particularly within the context of academia. So while by no means the first, and I'm sure the last, of such material within the context of labor law. It is an impressive addition at the moment. And for all those students who are reading labor law, my students who are the law school, the UPS law school who are here, I strongly recommend that you do procure copies. But I also tell you one thing. When I was a student back some years ago, and thinking I was wiser than everybody else, I'm sure many of you are thinking you're wiser than everybody else at this stage, I did not use my money to buy books because I knew that photocopies produced exactly the same thing as the book itself. And so when you photocopy a particular sentence, it doesn't change. And knowing that, and I see Dr. Oyinikunodi, who back in the days was a lecturer as well. I'm not sure if I photocopied any of your books, Chairman, but the truth of the matter is I photocopied a lot of books instead of buying those books. And I thought I was fooling the authors. I ended up fooling myself, and I'm particularly addressing the law students. And the reason is this. A lawyer's office does not have photocopies. A lawyer's office can only have the original books. Now, books get expensive over time. And so whenever you postpone your purchases of books, what you are doing is that you're going to spend much more money to buy the same book that you could have bought today. But even worse, because I used all my monies on photocopies and other books, and once I became a lawyer, I needed to have my own library, I needed a lot of money to buy a lot of books at the same time. It is an investment I've never forgotten and an experience I wish I knew better on back in the days. So I encourage you, while you can clandestinely photocopy this or otherwise exploit its use and undermine the commercial returns of the authors, it is important to remember your own future. A lawyer is equivalent to his library, period. And if you do not have a library, you are not worth the name of being a lawyer. So start building your library today by buying the books piecemeal and incrementally, so that on that day when you are called to the bar, you do not have to do what I did, in respect of which I was not bold enough to tell my parents that all the monies that came, I had used it on photocopies. So I would like to once again thank the authors for spending time to come up with this book, which clearly reflects the currency of labor law, and the currency of labor law in the sense of labor law today. They have spoken to the cases, they have spoken to the text of the statute, they have spoken to international best practice, they have put all of them together in a compendium, usable and student-friendly, in a manner that can be helpful, especially within the context of an exam. But for practitioners too, you will find the book very instructive and very useful in the sense in which it is alive to the realities of modern-day labor law in Ghana today. It is not just a piece for an academic exercise of a student, but it is one that is very helpful, it speaks to industrial relations at the top and practitioner level, and that all of us will find it very useful. So without saying much, I would like to commend the book, Labor Law in Ghana Today, by Prof, and I've been practicing the name for the time I was sitting down. So hopefully I do get it right this time. But I think Prof. Lethokwa, is that correct? Prof. Lethokwa, yes. George Mpedi, professor at the very highest level of academia in Africa, the University of Johannesburg, which I was privileged to visit, one of the most prestigious universities in Africa, in South Africa, an impressive campus. For Prof to leave all he was doing and to produce this book tells you the passion with which he produced this and the connection he has with Ghana. So I commend Prof, and I do commend Dr. Coleman. Is Dr. Coleman here? Perhaps would like him to rise. Are you Dr. Coleman? Please rise so we know who you are. Yes, Prof and Dr. Coleman. For Prof and Dr. Coleman to expend much energy to produce this, and if you trust anything I've told you, it's a good book, I do commend its use to you, and I've been told I should also launch it. Is that correct?
You'll come.
We'll come back. Okay, so that's it. So at this stage, that's the review for which I especially commend the book for purposes of your procuring copies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Yes, please. Please, let's clap for him for the book review. We would like to invite the authors of the book, Prof, kindly come up, and Dr. Coleman, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Program Director. I will be brief. I've been talking the whole morning. I'm sure you're not tired of me. A lot of people were asking me, even this morning, that you're a South African. What's your business with labor law in Ghana? Even yesterday, some journalists asked me, but in a polite way, because it's a curious case where this South African decides to write about labor law in Ghana. Dr. Coleman, right next to me here, came as a student, exchange student, in 2017 when I was dean, and it was part of our friendship, with Ghana to provide an opportunity to young Ghanaians to study with us. And I said to him, a mister came to South Africa, a doctor will return to Ghana or stay, it's your decision, but you can't leave if you are not a doctor. And he worked as my student assistant. So as a curious academic, we always talked about, our laws and compared, the difference. And this is the joy of people moving, within the continent. And one of the areas as an expert in labor law that we discussed was some of the gaps in the Ghanaian system. And one of the issues he raised with me was the lack of a recent authoritative book in the space and area of labor law. And we took on the challenge to produce this book, and here we are. And this is the last thing I would say before I hand over to him. I thank each and every one of you for making time to engage with us, particularly the Vice Chancellor. Thank you so much, you and your team, for giving us this platform. We really appreciate it. So that is the background, and I thought with this batakari, I'll gain some acceptance. It's the second time I'm wearing it, and I'll wear it some more. So thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mpedi. I'd like to thank you and the University of Johannesburg for creating the platform for some of us to express ourselves from a scholarly standpoint. We know the project that is already on track and those that are yet to also be released. What I can promise the Ghanaian academic space is that there is more to come. A lot of academic literature in the Ghanaian context, in the legal fraternity, will come, and with God all things are possible. So thank you again, Prof. Thanks to UPSA for hosting this event, and we are hoping to come back to Ghana to engage more on other projects that we are working on and other projects that will come. Thank you again.
Let's appreciate them. It's not easy putting words together to write a book, so we appreciate you. Prof. Abuchi, now it's time to come and launch the book. Let's welcome him.
So my task now is to launch the book. I'm honored to have the privilege of doing this in the stead of the Honorable Minister of Labor, who unfortunately is not here today. As I indicated, the book is worth its cover and content. And therefore, whatsoever things are good and worthy of praise, I think it's on these things that I ask you to think, and I commend this book. The book was published by LexisNexis, perhaps, or arguably, the most prestigious publishing house in Africa, arguably. Authored Professor Mpedi and Dr. Coleman, and the year of publication is copyright 2022. So without much ado, and with the permission of the council chair for UPSA, the Vice Chancellor of UPSA, all other protocols observed, I would ask you to join me and to formally acknowledge that this book is deemed launched. I think maybe. It's not my book, so I can't, I just showed it to you. Prof, I think the two of you should come and hold it and pose for the cameras.
Thanks.